Welcome to our newest episode of Holocaust Remembrance Around the World, where we meet amazing people whose work shapes and reshapes Holocaust memory and education. They place the past in the current and make it relevant to their local context. My name is Lois Roman, and I'm usually behind the scenes as the producer of the series, but today I have the pleasure of acting as moderator. Dr. Shai Pilnik will return next month. This series is brought to you by the Emil A. and Jenny Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Yeshiva University. Please go to our website, www.yu.edu/Fish to see other events and learn about our new master's program for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, where world-class instruction is available for this rapidly changing field. If you have questions for our guest during our presentation, please put them in the chat bar and I'll try to ask them at the end of our formal questions. Please mute yourselves. And now, buckle your seatbelts as we travel to South Africa to chat with Ms. Tali Nates. Tali is the founder and executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. She's a historian, author, and fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar. Tali, we are so pleased to have you with us today.
It's wonderful to be in New York, even though I am in very cold, wintry Johannesburg.
Well, it's nice and hot here if you want to come for a live visit anytime. Let's start off by discussing the center itself. Why was it so important to you to open a Holocaust Center in Johannesburg?
Thanks so much. I founded this center, it's about 12 or 13 years ago, and it was, in a way, a legacy project for my late father. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He was saved by Oskar Schindler. We'll speak a little bit about that later. And I grew up in a home of Holocaust survivors with the Holocaust all around me. I moved to South Africa many, many years ago, and I loved history and studied history, became a historian, a lecturer at the university, and worked in many NGOs. In 2007, the Holocaust became part of the curriculum of all schools in South Africa. Possibly people do not know that South Africa is one of the only countries in Africa that has Holocaust mandatory in our curriculum. And that happened in 2007. But how do you support the teachers? How do you support the students? There was only a small center in Cape Town that opened in 1999, and they could not support everyone. And that is when the idea came to me through amazing, amazing people that said to me, why Johannesburg, that is the largest city in the whole of the continent of Africa and the most influential city, doesn't have such a center of education? And that was the kernel of the idea. It took many, many years, as I said, to create it. But from a dream that, as I said, that started when I was a little girl, of educating about the Holocaust and about genocide, that I'll speak a little bit about also later, it became a reality. We opened only our gates actually in March 2019 officially. We were operating, as I said, for about 12 years, but first from temporary offices, then from the building that was still being built. You see part of the building behind me, and we will introduce everyone to the building in a few minutes.
Thank you. Yes, I think we have a short video that we can show to introduce the center.
Welcome to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, a place of memory, education, dialogue, and lessons for humanity. The permanent exhibition of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center was officially opened in March 2019. It explores genocide in the 20th century, and it uses the histories of the Holocaust and the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda as the main case studies. The exhibition also makes connections to colonialism and South African history, as well as challenges of today, such as racism and xenophobia in South Africa. The Center's education programs are run by our passionate and knowledgeable facilitators and educators. They can either be delivered online, or in-center, or in your own school. And all our programs supplement and support the CAPS Social Sciences and History curriculum for grade 9 and grade 11 syllabus, and is applicable to all grades from grade 7 and above. We invite you and your learners to visit the center for a 3 to 4 hour education workshop, which includes a discussion on identity and othering, a tour of our permanent exhibition and the building, all the while making connections to today. We are also happy to come to your school for a similar program using our pop-up exhibition, multimedia, and interactive activities for a 1 to 2 hour program tailor-made to your needs and the needs of your students. Finally, our online teaching and learning will be using online platforms to interact and connect with your students. Our online programs are interactive and engaging, making use of survivor testimonies, historical images, short films, and artifacts. Each program ends with an activity called the Butterfly Project, where we ask students to reflect on the lessons they've learned from the program, write them down on a butterfly, and share a message of courage with others. For more information and resources, please visit our website, which is www.jhbholocaust.co.za, or call our office and speak to Delka on 011-640-3100. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you, Hodaya. So Tali, I see your background behind you is an image of inside the center. Are there special symbolism surrounding the wall behind you or any of the other aspects of the actual building itself?
So this building is an award-winning building. And, you know, the process of creating the center was an amazing process. As I said to you, I'm a historian, I studied history, but through founding this center, I became, you know, an assistant architect, a curator, you know, researcher, and so much more. The building was designed by a wonderful architect and his team, Mr. Louis Levine, a local architect from South Africa. And we did many workshops with survivors of the Holocaust, survivors of the genocide in Rwanda, and we asked them, what is the symbolism for you of genocide or of the Holocaust? It will not be surprising for you that the Holocaust survivors said the trains, the railway lines. And indeed, the building is surrounded by railway lines embedded into concrete and stones. The Rwandan survivors and many of the Holocaust survivors spoke about the trees, the landscape that witnessed the killing. And we know that during the Holocaust, mainly in Eastern Europe, the Einsatzgruppen shot the Jews into pits in many forests. In Rwanda also, it was the hills and the forests and the trees that witnessed the genocide. So the building is surrounded by greenery, by trees as well. What you see behind me is when the railway lines disappear. And what you see is a wall of reflection, a wall of memory. There are lights shining through these voids, these empty spaces where the railway lines disappear, and all you have is reflection on what was lost. What is lost in genocide? When the Holocaust happened, 6 million Jews were murdered, but is it only the 6 million that were murdered, or Is it more? What about the children that will never be born? What about the art that will never be made? What about the medicine that will never be invented? So you can see that we thought about everything, and this building and exhibition is full of symbolism. Behind it, the image is mirroring, I'm sorry about that, but behind me there is the very famous quote of Primo Levi: it happened, therefore it can happen again, and it can happen anyway. And what we try to do a lot in the building is look at symbolism of genocide through the railway lines, through the courtyards, through the trees, through the bricks. For example, you see behind me the brick, the red burned brick that is very similar to the images of Auschwitz that we know. And the architect chose to build the building in what we call English bond motif. English bond is bricks that are laid long, short, long, short. You see it very, very clearly behind me. And this is invented by the British Empire for beauty, but also for strength, symbolizing colonialism, symbolizing strength and also power. Now, Auschwitz-Birkenau and Auschwitz is also built in English bond. And this very subtle symbolism is there everywhere. And those questions of never again are also there everywhere.
Oh, it's amazing how much symbolism goes into the building of immovable Holocaust memorials, as your center is one of those. In the video, the term identity and xenophobia were mentioned, which are unfortunately much more movable ideas. How does that enter into what you do at the center? How do you express those two very big and complex ideas to the children that come through the doors?
So the center, as my colleague and wonderful educator, Tali, said, the center teaches genocide in the 20th century. We're actually starting in next door to us in what is now Namibia and what used to be German Southwest Africa, later on under South African control. And we are talking about the Herero and Nama genocide of 1904, the first genocide of the 20th century, only 3 weeks ago, recognized as genocide by Germany. It also speaks about Armenia, but the main case studies are the Holocaust and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Now, to understand genocide, and let's look at the Holocaust, for example. To understand the Holocaust, you need to understand identity. You need to understand us and them. You need to understand ideology of the Germans, of the Nazis, of superior and inferior. You need to understand targeted groups. Why were they targeted? So why the Jews were targeted? You need to understand ideology of hate, anti-Semitism in this case. And identity is in the core, really, of why genocide happens. The targeting, the intent to destroy in whole or in part a group of people. That is genocide, as defined, as coined, the word, of course, coined by Raphael Lemkin in 1944, a Jewish Polish lawyer. And that word from Latin and Greek, the killing of a whole people, is targeting them, the people, not us, them. Now, in South Africa, there is another layer that we need to look at. Apartheid, that was a huge, huge crime against humanity issue, of course, from 1948 to 1994, where main population, the majority population of Black people, but also other populations in South Africa were targeted, not for genocide this time, but from greed and from economic reasons. And for the visitors and the students that are coming to our center, us and them in our experience of our past, our terrible, terrible past, is usually white versus black. Now, when you teach about the Holocaust, when the targeting was by whites of other whites that many times looked exactly like them, but were targeted for different reasons, or when you teach about Rwanda, where the Hutu, the perpetrator group, targeted the Tutsi victim group, that both were, in that case, black, identity needs to be looked at very, very differently. You need to look at religion, you need to look at castes, you need to look at class, you need to look at other issues. So identity is in really the core of what we do and how we start looking at this very complex issue of genocide or the Holocaust.
Yes, and it is very complex, both with its origins and with the events that occurred and in all the different places around the world where it did occur. I'm curious, what kinds of questions do the students have when they come into the center? Or also, I guess, what kinds of comments do they write on those butterfly cards at the end?
Such a good question, because of course, to study about the Holocaust or to study about genocide, it's very, not only complex, but it's difficult. It's a difficult history. Let's look at the Holocaust, for example. There is lack of knowledge to start with. It is in the curriculum, but the learners, we call them learners here, the students, are young. They are 13, 14 years old when they have to study about this case study of history. They don't know much about it. Maybe they know a little bit from pop culture, from films or from other things. Maybe they heard the word, Auschwitz. Some of them studied the Diary of Anne Frank when they were a bit younger. Some are studying other books. So maybe they heard about it, but they don't know much about it. So starting to teach about this very complex history is difficult. And how do you teach it? Do you teach it from the viewpoint of the perpetrators? We don't want to do that. We don't want to represent the perpetrators. We want to teach it through the eyes of survivors, through the eyes of victims, through the eyes of people that witnessed it, through the eyes of those that saved, the upstanders. So we chose our exhibition very, very carefully. We really teach it through individual stories, not only through the millions and millions, not only through statistics, but through stories of survivors that settled in South Africa, for example. We will teach it through choices that people made. The way we teach it is that you, the visitor, also have choices. So the programs that we run, those 3 to 4 hours programs, are really teaching about genocide, not as something that is inevitable, that, what could you have done? There's nothing that you could have done. It's larger than you, it's bigger than you. But we teach it as something that is, in a way, lessons for humanity, that things could have been different if individuals, communities, governments would have acted differently. And that's how we teach this history. And in the end of the 4 hours, those butterflies, we ask the students, the learners, to write a lesson that they learned, something that they reflected on. And maybe you noted in the film that many times the messages will be very, very powerful. And you can see it on our website. Just go into the Butterfly Project on our website. There's also a film about it in our YouTube channel and our educator resources under our website, where learners will say, for example, one note that I will never forget was where a learner said, sometimes I sit with my family around the table and they speak badly about foreigners that are that settled in our country. And now I learn better, and I will say to them, stop, they are as human as you are. And this is what I learned today. So the messages are very much full of hope and full of, hopefully, lessons that the students, learners can implement in their own life and in their own current situation in the country and community.
Yes, I think bringing big concepts like the Holocaust or a genocide down to the individual personal level really, really helps anybody, but especially younger learners. There's a photo that you have, actually a wall with two photos you have in the museum. One is of a Holocaust survivor with a quote, and one is of the Rwandan genocide with a quote. And I found that very powerful about the similarities leading up to both of those genocides, and the fact that you're teaching the children in South Africa about that.
Yeah, that photo, and I'm not sure if you have it and you can share it, but is of two survivors that actually volunteer at the center. So we have only 11 staff members. It's a very small team, but we have about 100 volunteers. And some of them are Holocaust survivors and Tutsi survivors from Rwanda that settled in South Africa after the war. And that's those survivors. One of them is Irene Klaas. Irene Klaas is, as you can see, she just turned 90 years old in June. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman, born in Łódź and suffered in the Warsaw Ghetto. She lost her father in the Holocaust, her grandmother. She was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and she escaped with the help of her father that smuggled her outside of the ghetto, and then her mother managed to escape. Both of them survived. Her father did not survive. And she speaks to groups of students and teachers and the public, and she tells her story. And she always ends by saying, I thought that when the world learned what had happened to us, it could never happen again, but it did. And that is the bottom line, because after the Holocaust, the world said never again. The United Nations was established after the Holocaust, and those words were said, but it did happen again. And Sylvester Sendakieye, that is a wonderful, wonderful survivor, he was 12 years old. Irene was 8 years old in the beginning of the war. Sylvester was 12 years old, and he lost his parents, his siblings. Only 2 of his brothers survived, and he survived with a machete scar on his skull. The killers, the perpetrators, left him dead, basically, in the church, but he survived. And a German nun actually helped him and saved his life, and then others saved him. And he always, when he tells his story and his testimony, he said, a genocide happened yet again to us here in Rwanda, in full view of the world, and no one did anything. For 100 days, more than 1 million Tutsi were murdered, and the world did not get involved. I also tell the story, Lois, that, you know, I'm a daughter of survivors, as I told you, but in April 1994, I was here in South Africa voting in our first democratic elections. We stood for hours to vote, and I voted that night at 10 o'clock that night. And in Rwanda already the genocide was happening for 3 weeks. I was so happy that everything was going well in South Africa, that Nelson Mandela was chosen as our first president. And even I, that grew up with all those stories, never made the connection. Not that moment, not in April of 1994, the 3.5 hours down the road from me, a genocide was happening. And you know, it took me weeks and months to make that connection. And I always say we need to make those connections quicker, because if we don't make those connections quicker, atrocities continue to happen. And I'm privileged to work with Irene and Sylvester, because they teach us such valuable lessons, and we need to learn, and we need to learn quicker.
Yes, Thank you for sharing. And, you know, it's hard not to feel guilt in many ways, whether it's, you know, guilt from the world events, guilt from being alive during a genocide and not acting fast enough. Um, while you were speaking, Hodaya put up the photo of you holding the photo of your father. I wonder if you would be gracious enough to share with us your family's story and how it came to be that you're in South Africa today.
So my father, Marion, his Polish name was Moses Turner. I was born a Turner. Now I'm a Nates. I married my lovely husband, Clive Nates, and but I was born to the Turner family, and my father, Moshe, was a survivor from Poland. He was born in a small town called Nowy Targ. It's in the southwest area of Poland, and he was in a family of 4 siblings. He had a brother that also survived with him. He had 2 sisters that tragically did not survive. They were murdered in the Belzec killing center. And his father died, my grandfather died just when he was 2 years old. Sadly, he had cancer and he died. And his mother, my grandmother, Leah Eleonora Turner, looked after the 4 siblings. And when the war started, my father was taken quite quickly out of the town, Nowy Targ, and he was in 4 different concentration camps. He survived thanks to Oskar Schindler. He was on Schindler's List. He and my uncle, Henrik Hanoch Turner, were on Schindler's List on page 10 of the list. But as I said, my 2 aunts, Helen, I'm named after Helen. My second name is Helen. And my other aunt, Chaya, they were both murdered together with my grandmother. And they were murdered on the 30th of August of 1942. I don't have a picture of my grandmother. I have drawings of my 2 aunts that my father recovered through relatives. And my father always spoke about Schindler. He always spoke about choices. I grew up with those lessons, actually. And when I spoke in the beginning about legacy, about learnings, you know, he didn't speak much. He was very traumatized. I don't have time to tell you the full story of, you know, what went on in those 4 concentration camps where he was, but he was very, very traumatized human being. He was 14 years when the war started. He was a teenager, and the experiences were very, very difficult for him. But he always used to say that people have choices, and Oskar Schindler, that was a German that belonged to the Nazi party, made a choice to, you know, to save more than 1,000 men, women, and children. And those lessons that he taught me were about, don't generalize. You cannot say all those people are bad or all those people are good. And those choices that people made were very important for him. And no wonder that I'm teaching now, and we are all teaching now about choices. You know, the connection is very, very clear. My uncle was the one that spoke. My uncle was the one that wrote memories. He wrote poetry. He always spoke to me. You know, my father, as I said, was more traumatized. He also died, sadly, when he was only 48 years old, and I was a young teenager. But my uncle was the one that would tell me the stories, that will share with me the history. And in a way, I am, you know, I created the museum and teaching the lessons thanks to their stories and their legacy. And maybe if you don't mind, I'll tell you just one more story, because it's unbelievable what happened in the last 2 months. And I didn't share with you a picture of it because it only just happened. But about 2 months ago, I received an email from a colleague, friend of mine, the director of the Galicia Jewish Museum, Jakub Nowakovsky. And he said to me that a friend of his, Dariusz Popila, that is a canoeist, an Olympian. Now the Olympic Games are happening, but he's a gold medalist, a champion in Poland. Both of them, of course, not Jewish. He is a head of a non-profit organization, a foundation in the area where my father was born, in Novi Targ. And he found the gravestone, the matzeva, of my grandfather that died of cancer when my father was 2 years old. We never knew where the matzeva is, where the tombstone is, and Dariusz Popila found it in a backyard of a farmer. The gravestone, the matzeva of Tzvi Turner, my grandfather, was now restored fully. I got a picture 10 days ago of that matzeva. And now Dariusz Popila and his foundation are creating in the cemetery of Novi Targ, in the Jewish cemetery of Novi Targ, a tombstone with the names of the 2,000 people that were murdered by the Nazis, including my grandmother and my aunts, and many other members of the family. And the gravestone, the matzeva of my grandfather, will also be returned to the cemetery of Novi Targ. And I want to tell it because this is exactly the tikkun olam, this amazing work that we don't hear about often. And look at that. I'm in South Africa. This is happening in Poland. And here we speak about it in New York. Isn't it all amazing?
How special is that? And I always think that just the act of saying the name makes all the past come into the present. And we can see how Holocaust remembrance is still an active field today. There are new discoveries and new activities. One aspect of the center I want to cover before we finish is about the Changemakers program. And you've given your all to the center. You're educating so many people, adults and children, but I found this particular program to be very special. I was wondering if you would share a little bit about it with us. And I think, Hodaya, we have 1 or 2 pictures of participants in that program.
So we started, this is, by the way, my father. I can go through the slides very quickly and tell the audience if they want to know. So for example, this is a picture of myself in the building site with a picture of my father, Moses Turner, that my friend, the photographer John David took some years ago. This is in 2019, I took a group of teachers and activists from all over Africa to Poland and Germany. Together with us was a wonderful Holocaust survivor, Wanda Albinski, that survived the Warsaw Ghetto, and her mother sadly was murdered in Treblinka. She was a doctor in the Warsaw Ghetto. And we're standing in Schindler's factory, you know, exactly where my father, you know, the man that my father owes his life to. So this is quite a moving picture. The next is, of course, this Primo Levi quote that I spoke about, and this is the lobby of our museum, and you can see the symbolism that I spoke about a little bit more. There are some pictures of the museum, so you will see some of the images of the museum, a little bit about the genocides that we are covering, that I spoke about. And you can see that the exhibition is interesting because it's multi-layered and it has lots of photos and videos. We made 24 films, and there is lots of activities, and you sort of use all your body through it. We also have windows in the exhibition. The exhibition is in daylight because what we wanted to do is to say genocide does not happen in the dark. It happens during the day while you are watching, while we are watching, and we need to get involved in it. The Changemakers program, that you see pictures here from Nigeria and Rwanda, but it was done in 12 countries so far, and we're going to launch it in the 13th country in Zambia very, very soon, is a program that was created by ourselves and by Aegis Trust Rwanda. And one of your guests few weeks ago, was Freddie Mutangua. And Freddie Mutangua is the director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial and of Aegis Trust. Freddie is a dear friend of mine for many, many years. And together, we created this Change Makers program. What is it? It was created at the Salzburg Global Seminar. And what Freddie and myself and many, many others, wonderful people, did was to take the case studies of the Holocaust, of Rwanda, of apartheid, and put a program together that is a leadership program, basically applying the lessons from genocide and from crimes against humanity to young leaders and to teachers and professors and activists, and say to them, let's learn together about how countries in Africa can find regional and continental solutions for our problems. And many of the problems in, for example, Nigeria, or in Mozambique, or in the Gambia, or in many other places, is that there is rise in extremism, violent extremism. There is abuse of power. There is xenophobia. There is Afrophobia. There is racism, and so on. And what we do through the case studies is to teach about how extremism is dangerous and how we need to use our voices and our choices to stop that from happening in our countries. What we also do in different countries is we develop other case studies. So for example, in Nigeria, we helped to develop a case study about the civil war there. Between 1967 and 1970, there was a civil war. Many remember maybe Biafra, the starvation in Biafra that was man-made, and we helped them to create that. In Rwanda, of course, the case study of the genocide. And also in South Africa, we used our own case study. So I think there is another picture of a case study from South Africa that we did. So that is it. And that is just to say that it was evaluated actually by the University of Pretoria, and it proved to be a successful program. So, we're hoping to run it in many more countries in Africa.
Truly fascinating. So do you have a message for our viewers? We have viewers from all over the world tuning in and listening to the replay of these episodes. If you had one sentence that you wanted to share, what would it be?
I think that the message is very simple. It is in each one of us, the ability to be a force to good rather than a force to evil. Always reflect on the choices that you're making. Always try not to be a bystander. Bystander always helps the perpetrator of evil, but never helps the one that suffers. So always try to be an activist for good. And if you do that, those circles of good will spread all around, and we can all become that change maker that I spoke about before, but change maker for good, I hope.
Change maker. I hope that we all can do our part to become change makers in the world. Tali, this has been such an inspiring conversation with you, and I've learned so much. I can't wait until COVID is behind us and we can travel the world. I want to come and see your center. I want to encourage our viewers to tune in next month on Sunday, August 29th at noon Eastern Time, when we will have the opportunity to speak with Reverend Otsuka, the director of the Holocaust Center in Fukuyama, Japan. It is going to be a wonderful, wonderful episode.
If there's truth to the saying that history repeats itself, then Holocaust remembrance and the study of genocide is not only a vital part of history, but also a crucial warning for the future.
Confronting Holocaust deniers and distorters is one of the most important tasks of our generation.
The Fish Center at Yeshiva University was founded with this mission of preserving the history of the Holocaust as well as more recent genocides. Our master's program offers a unique investigation of the Holocaust of European Jewry, with an interdisciplinary approach through the lenses of law, social work, history, theology, education, literature, and political science. If this sounds like a path you would like to pursue, apply now or learn more. I'd like to extend an invitation for you to join us and become a member of our growing community of scholars and educators.
Thank you to all of our community partners. We are always looking for new community partners. If anybody would like to become one, please reach out to us on our website. The Holocaust and Human Rights Center in White Plains, New York, the Center for Holocaust Education in the East Valley JCC in Arizona, 3GNY, the Florida Holocaust Museum, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs at Yeshiva University, Shadowlight in Canada, Manhattan College, the Sosua 75 in the Dominican Republic, the Holocaust Memorial and Museum in San Antonio, Texas, Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center in South Africa, 2 different programs at the University of Miami, the Holocaust and Education Center in Fukuyama, Japan, the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie, the Sister Rose Thiering Fund in Education for Jewish and Christian Studies, the Lake District Holocaust Project in the UK, Jewish Gen, and the Maltz Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. Lastly, a giant thank you to my colleagues at the Fish Center, Hodaya Blau, who was providing the technical support for today's program. I couldn't have done it without you. And a big thank you to Dr. Shai Pilnik for giving me the opportunity to be the moderator today and for putting the program together in general. I wish everyone a restful and peaceful day. Thank you so much, Tali.